Hello, welcome to News Dakota's webinar on climate change and human rights. Today, students from the European School Brussels II in Belgium and Jolla Country Day School in the United States will explore the intersection between climate change and human rights. And with no further ado, I'd like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. So first off, Lucy.
Hi, I'm Lucy. I go to La Jolla Country Day School. I'm in my second to last year of high school. And La Jolla Country Day School is in San Diego, California.
Terrific.
And I will be presenting,
sorry. Go ahead, Lucy. I was going to ask you what you'll be discussing.
I'll be presenting on the effects and importance of embedding climate education into school curriculums.
Right. And Linnea.
Hello, I'm Linnea. I live in Brussels, Belgium, and I'm also my second to last year. I go to the European School here, and I will be introducing a project that we've been doing, and Laura and Ava will be going into more depth.
Laura.
Hello, everyone. I'm Laura from the European School of Brussels. I'm in my last year of high school, and I will be presenting the project, the big wall that we painted in our school.
A wall which has been featured in a story on News Dakota. Very good story, by the way. Ava, over to you.
Hi, I'm Ava. I'm also from the European School of Brussels in Belgium, and I'll be presenting a video that we've made, or a segment of it, about the countries related to climate change.
Terrific, thank you, Ava. And last, Varun.
Hi, my name is Varun Singh. I go to Jolla Country Day in San Diego. I'm my second last year of high school, and I will be talking about water scarcity in various global regions and its relevance to San Diego's own water instability.
Thank you very much, Varun. So my name is Nelson Graves, and I'm the founder of News Dakota. I'm speaking to you from rural France, and I'll be the moderator today. Now, our panelists will discuss climate education, the creation of sustainable environmental conditions, and water scarcity. Each student has up to 4 minutes to present their reporting and research, and then up to 4 minutes of questions and answers. Now, a bit of important housekeeping. We like these sessions to be interactive, and we invite those of you who are not on camera to ask questions or make comments at any time. And to do so, we ask that you use the Q&A function on your screen, not the chat, but the Q&A. The advantage is that you can actually vote for questions that you may find particularly pertinent and interesting. So do use the Q&A function at any time to ask a question or make a comment. I'll be moderating. Now, the session will last for 1 hour, and we are recording it. And for those who cannot participate in the live session. So with no further ado, let's get going. Lucy, over to you.
Just quickly before I present, I don't think Tavisha had the opportunity to introduce herself, so I thought I'd allow that.
Oh, well, thank you for correcting me on that one. Tavisha, did I miss you?
Yes, thanks, Lucy. So my name's Tavisha. I go to La Jolla Country Day in San Diego. I'm in my second to last year of high school as well, and I'll be talking about the implication and impact of living a sustainable lifestyle.
Thank you, Tavisha, and my apologies for that oversight on my part. Lucy, thank you for bringing that to our attention. Over to you.
All right, I will share my screen. Let's see here. All right, can everybody see this?
Yes.
First slide here.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, let me go back. Oops. Sorry about that.
All right.
Okay. Hi, once again, I'm Lucy. I go to La Jolla Country Day School, and I'm going to be talking about the effects and importance of embedding climate education to school curriculums and the integral role that teachers play in reducing climate damage. So first, to begin, what is climate literacy, and what should be embedded in school curriculum anyways? So when individuals become climate literate, this means they understand the essential principles of Earth's climate system. They know how to discern what information about the climate is credible and what may be fiction. They understand as an individual their personal role and what their decisions contribute to the climate crisis and how they can affect their community. So the importance of climate education in reducing climate damage sort of relies on this study that was established in the Proceedings of the National Academies of Sciences, which took a group of Italian teachers, citizens, students, and allowed them to receive a pretty substantial climate education. And as a result, the individuals who were a part of the study had a 7 to 30% climate emission reduction amongst those participants in Italy. And how Americans feel about this is 78% of Americans believe that schools should be teaching about climate change. And as a result, 70% of American states have adopted these measures to implement climate literacy into their curriculum. This has been done through measures called the Next Generation Science Standards in many states. Other states have adopted comparable standards. However, although 70% of these states have adopted these standards, 55% of American teachers say climate change is not discussed with their students at all. So where does this disconnect occur? If the public and teachers and state standards are all encouraging climate literacy, why isn't it being taught? I had the opportunity to interview Dr. Nan Renner, who works at UC San Diego's Birch Aquarium, and she's the head of an initiative called the Climate Champions Initiative, to learn some more about this. And what Dr. Renner mentioned is because climate change is an ecosystemic phenomenon, it's a multidisciplinary issue. It spans across multiple different subjects, whether it be social justice, political systems, economic systems, animals, humans, they're all really connected. And as a result, schools are not really set up structurally in the best manner to approach an issue like this. This is mainly because schools are set up in a disintegrated approach, meaning that content is compartmentalized into subject lines, and there's not really much opportunity for things to cross these lines, whereas climate education requires that approach. Additionally, teachers feel they haven't been receiving proper training to approach this. The next generation science standards are pretty vague, so teachers are developing these narratives on their own and often not having a substantial climate education of themselves. I interviewed Tina Tom, who was Teacher of the Year in her district, school district in San Diego County, and she mentioned that teachers don't even know where to pull resources from. There's so much on the internet that they're not sure what's credible, what would be helpful to their students. And it's also hard to figure out, especially when teaching younger students, what will resonate with them, since climate change is not really something that's super tangible for younger students to see or even just regular individuals. And also, it's hard to give students the motivation to do things and figure out what they can do as the younger generation when they may not have the ability to purchase a car or reduce auto emissions and things like that. So sort of giving some, focus on what Dr. Renner and the Climate Champions Initiative is doing, because they're a good example of a way that teachers are receiving this training, this education, is they're taking an evidence-based approach that incorporates climate justice and is solutions focused for students. So the Climate Champions Initiative has been working towards providing teachers with resources that give them, get them in touch with experts who offer them credible data that they can draw from when speaking to their students. It gives them directed lesson plans and projects that students will enjoy. It incorporates how different, sectors of, it really incorporates the multidisciplinary aspect of climate change and how it affects more than just carbon emissions and things like that. And it also gives people a solutions focus. They're not being overly upset by the information that they hear, and that they feel motivated and ready to become the next generation of climate activists.
That's it.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you, Lucy. By the way, and I'm going to put into chat here a link to a story that Lucy wrote on this. She very courageously and energetically converted her research into a story for News Dakota, which we published just a while back. So, and it's also the focus of her presentation now, which is also close to the heart of those in Brussels, I know, because they've been working very hard to make sure that climate change is embedded into the curriculum. In fact, they're focusing on it. Any questions of Lucy, either from other panelists or from attendees who can use the Q&A to ask a question at any time? Brussels, does what Lucy presented, does it resonate with you? Is it what you are seeing in Europe? That is that some schools are having difficulty teaching about climate change because it's a multidisciplinary topic and because it can be hard for some teachers to communicate?
Yeah, I think you can definitely see that a lot of teachers are really interested in it and willing to teach about it, but it's not set in the curriculum and it's not sure how to do it in the best way for students of different ages to learn. So I can see that here as well.
And how is it done at your school?
Well, we don't have mandatory lessons about it, but there are quite a few teachers who bring it in. For example, in geography, I learned quite a bit about it, and I have in my French classes. But I do think that it should be a bigger topic in these science topics.
And Lucy, how is it taught at La Jolla Country Day School?
I think we do have a new class that focuses on environment and intersection with the arts. But other than that, the only way that climate education is sort of incorporated, at least at the high school level, is if you choose to be part of specific clubs, like our green team that focuses on sustainability. And I think if you actively go out and seek it and try and become part of clubs, you'll learn about it. But at least in, a day-to-day curriculum, it's not really focused on.
And sorry, go ahead, please. Tavisha.
I was just gonna say that most of these classes are elective and most of these clubs are elective and nothing's really mandatory. And if there is any education about it, it's if a teacher is particularly interested, they might bring in snippets of information. Specifically, if they're a science teacher, they might talk about it, but it's really just not standardized among all students.
Thank you, Tavisha. And Lucy, have you brought your article to the attention of the powers that be at La Jolla Country Day School, by the way, to see if they could incorporate some of the recommendations?
I think some of the teachers have definitely read the article, at least the ones that are, friendly with me. But I don't think the administration has acknowledged it in the sense of wanting to make change in our own community.
Make any changes? Okay, fair enough. Thank you very much, Lucy. Over to Linnea now.
Yeah, so hello everyone. Thank you for organizing this, and thank you to everyone who's here. So Laura, Ava, and I are in Brussels, Belgium, in the European School, and we are in a group called the Climate Academy, which is student-led, along with two teachers, Mr. Pai and Monsieur Duquin. And so we really concentrate on cutting emissions and the lack of education. So we had a project, a mural called The Writing on the Wall. I'll share a photo with it. Can everyone see?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, yeah. So here's the mural that we painted in our school. Just for a size, here's a railing, and yeah, these are the steps. So this is partially just to show the lack of education, and Laura will go into a lot more depth about it in the next presentation. To also demonstrate this lack of education, we are making a trilogy of 3 videos, and we have a snippet draft of one of them, which I will show you. Let me know if you can hear it, because that's very important.
America. Yes, we hear it.
Could you hear it?
Yes, we heard the video.
Yeah?
Yep.
Oh, great. Okay.
America, China,
Australia,
India,
China,
India. Everyone. Each country needs to do something about the United States. L'Europe en général.
China.
No.
The United States of America.
Yes.
I think of Brazil.
Brazil.
United States or China, Bangladesh. China. United States. I think USA.
Russia. United States or China.
The United States, Japan, China.
Egypt. The US, China, and Russia.
West Europe and China. China, USA.
So here we can see that it was mainly China and the United States of America as answers. And this demonstrates
what was the question, Linnea?
Oh, we asked them, which country do you think of when you think of climate change?
Okay, thank you.
So which country comes to your mind, which problematic country? And yeah, it will be explaining more why this demonstrates lack of education.
Great. Okay, well then let's seamlessly move to Laura.
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Laura, and I'm the head of media for the Climate Academy. So it's me and the people in charge, and basically the role was our year project. Probably would have done more if it wasn't for COVID, but because of COVID, we had to push it back a lot. And so now we have the wall that we painted and the videos. Really the wall shows 10 people staring straight ahead as if asking for an answer. And our inspiration behind it was a painting by Norman Rockwell, The Right to Know, which also depicts a bunch of people looking straight ahead, again, asking for answers. Now, this was painted in the 1960s and it had to do with the Vietnam War and the right to freedom. So we kind of rehashed that idea to make it about climate change. We have above the people, save our future, cut 11% of emissions now. And cut 11% is a really important number. It's basically the number of emissions that the entire world needs to cut together to stop or make climate change go slower, to fix what we've done. These are all official numbers. Every year the report comes out. For example, for Belgium, we have to cut 13%, but then there's certain who have to cut around 25%. And all these numbers together are 11%. So that is why it says cut 11% of emissions now. So the idea was to criticize the fact that we are given a really information in our education about climate change. In a lot of schools, even zero, even though teachers might want to. This is why in Belgium, for example, pre-COVID, there were climate marches every single Friday, and students were always allowed to go. Teachers and schools would allow it, but they don't teach anything themselves. So the wall has been a huge success everywhere. Every single day, thousands of students pass by it, so everyone sees it, and it's been posted so many times. There's a story on Newsdecoder about it. Even on TikTok, which was our biggest hit, we got around 50,000 views for the wall. So right now, we're still fighting and demanding that the lack of climate change education stops. We wanted curriculums. We want it, I'd say, in geography, because what you need is the basic science and it falls under parts of geography. But what we are doing to make this happen right now are the 3 videos. What you just saw is a rough draft of one of them, because we are making 3 videos, each answering a different question, which will kind of they will be used as evidence to show that we need this education, especially because we will be the people dealing with it in the future years. So yeah, on to Ava to present the videos and explain what they're all about.
Okay, we'll reserve questions of the students from Brussels until Ava's finished. Ava, over to you.
Okay, so I'll be explaining more about what the video that Linnea showed, which was, as she said, we asked students and people on the streets what country came to their mind when they thought of climate change. And a lot of them overall were saying China and the US, with a few saying India as well. And basically from that, we felt we can kind of show the miseducation or lack of education about climate change, because although it sounds kind of logical to say China or the US, because a lot of our things are made in China or the US, that if we wanted to focus on their territorial emissions, that could make sense, but it wouldn't be logical to focus on the worldwide emissions, in a sense of we consume what they are producing. So when we're going into this, we're thinking like the emissions that we need to take into account aren't the emissions that were shown a lot or are shown by teachers. It's some teachers, it's the emissions that we take a huge part in as well. So I used the cut 11% values for this. So the percentage is like the annual emissions that we need to cut to meet the Paris Agreement objective. And for the US, this is 18%, which is quite high. But for China, it's 6%. And for India, they only need to cut 1.3%. But what we noticed is there's a lot of countries above the 18% of the US that just weren't mentioned in the video. There's Mongolia, Trinidad and Tobago, which are around 20%. There's Kuwait, which is 27%. There's the UAE, which is 24%, and the highest consumer of carbon emissions yearly is Qatar, who would need to cut 35%. So from this video, we felt we could pull the conclusion that we aren't given a proper education at all about climate change, because there's a repetition of our students and of people walking around Brussels who think that China and the US are the main emitters. And we felt like this one question was important, like the question of which country comes to your mind, because although it might not seem like a big question, at the same time, if we're going out and we're asking politicians to make a change, and we're saying make a change in China, make a change in India, when they are not the big polluters or the big consumers, we need to kind of rethink, and we need to get this re-education of climate change. And like Laura was saying, we felt it should be embedded in geography, because like Lucy mentioned, there's a huge division of the classes, and climate change is a really huge spread out subject that doesn't fit very well into one singular thing. If it was embedded into like geography, which for us is a compulsory course, then it would almost be a compulsory subject. So yeah. Interesting.
I very much take your point about emissions being not just a supply, but also a demand problem. In other words, it's not simply the countries that are producing the goods and perhaps generating the emissions, but the goods are for countries that are consuming, and they're part of the whole process. I take that point, but could you be a little bit? Perhaps I missed it, but could you, when you said that the U.S. had to cut 18%, what is the 18% of? What?
18% of their annual carbon emissions. So from any sector at all, they just need to cut 18% in total to meet the Paris Agreement's requirements.
And does that take into account their consumption, or is that only the generation?
That's on their consumption.
Okay, interesting. We had two questions from the floor actually, which we haven't had time to address, and you've pretty much addressed it now. But I'll ask the question anyways of the students from Brussels. Which countries have to cut the highest percent of their emissions? Well, you've pretty much said that. I mean, the most stunning figure was it 35% for, was it UAE or Qatar?
Or Qatar, 35%, yeah.
Is that a per capita basis, or I'm still having a little bit trouble getting my head around?
It's like every year in Qatar by itself needs to find a way to cut 35% of their
of its emissions.
Yeah, of its
to achieve an 11% across the board reduction globally. Is that it?
Yeah, we used the 11% because in 2018 we started using these numbers, I think it was, and that was the average of like the world. Mm-hmm. So including the really high countries like Qatar and countries that could increase their emissions and still be on an almost neutral level. Mm-hmm. So the cut 11% is kind of like a slogan to, like, it was an average of 2018, and I think now the average is closer to cut 12% for the world.
It probably is, because there's a report out this week. It's quite disappointing, which shows that the carbon emissions have risen dramatically this year. You know, the few months of pause that we had in 2020 have been more than offset by increases this year. So it probably is closer to 12%. I've had questions. Let's give a chance to other panelists or to attendees to ask questions of our students in Brussels for their work. By the way, I've put up a link in chat to a story that about the wall at the Brussels School, which is now completed. I believe, right? You finished the painting. It took what, several days, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, it took a little less than a week. I think it took about 4 days, which was really incredible because the people who were painting, they were with 4 and an art teacher. So
Only 4 people did the
they
painting.
worked really, really hard on it. Yeah.
And have there been any press reports, local press or regional or national press reports on it in Belgium? Newspapers or
Not yet.
television? Well, you got to get on the radar screen of the local media. It's a very
we have to.
It's a very captivating visual. Questions from San Diego of the students in Brussels?
Yeah, I was gonna say, so for countries that need to cut their carbon emissions, what areas would they take out their portion of carbon emissions from? Would it be automotive, economic, or agriculture, depending on which countries are actually the highest producers of carbon emissions?
I think I'm not very sure, but I think it would be very much up to the countries. Like if you had a country that kind of their main consumption was because of their economy, they wouldn't be cutting it down there, but they might be cutting it down in transport or in industry, or just like, I think it would be like, it's very flexible to what each country would choose to cut down on, kind of.
Thank you.
And
I was also curious.
sorry, go ahead, please. Go ahead, Lucy.
I was also curious if anyone that you'd interviewed mentioned Belgium as a country that they thought needed to reduce their climate emissions, and why that may be if there was nobody.
I think a few people mentioned Belgium, but for the sole purpose that because they live in Belgium and they want their country to cut their emissions as well. But no one saw Belgium as a strong polluter or someone who really needed to cut down emissions. So yeah.
I had a question for all panelists, actually, and that is, do you think that the primary responsibility for reversing climate change is on the shoulders of governments or on the shoulders of citizens like us?
I'd say definitely on the government. They have to impose laws, and because there are things that we can do, obviously, like the best thing you could do, for example, is go vegan. And people always like to tell you like, oh, recycle, or something really big that we're probably all guilty of is buying fast fashion, which is also terrible for the environment. But it's not really up to us to change our lifestyle completely, because until we don't get those laws, not everyone will follow it, and individual change won't make any global change. And that is what we need at this point. You can do things individually, obviously, and like we should all minimalize our meat and dairy intake, and maybe be mindful of where we shop and things like that. But it's come to a point where we need global change, and we can't make that happen by ourselves.
Interesting. Anyone disagree with that?
I would disagree to some extent. I think obviously it is important for us to, I think the government should be doing things, but I also know that it's difficult because governments have at the moment, because of the way society is, have other priorities. And I think that as individuals, it's our responsibility to make sure that governments know that this is a priority that us as people want. And so if we start to make changes, we can start to encourage them, or even I think it's not only governments. I think there's also corporations, like big businesses and big companies, that more so affect, and those can be regulated by the governments. But I think that there's some extent where like we as individuals also have to make an impact, because if we keep on going on this unsustainable trajectory, then the government can't really help. I don't know if that really made sense.
Makes sense. Other views on this? It's a pretty important question.
I mean, I completely understand what you mean, and it is also important that we regulate what we do and that we're mindful of our actions and all of that. But then, for example, like afford to not buy fast fashion or buy from ethical brands or buy like the correct meat or eggs or whatever. It's like some people just don't have the option to start living like that. And if you put rules on these big corporations, because there's like there's a group of these big corporations and they're the top cause of climate change. And if the government would start putting laws on them, it would make the biggest possible change, I think.
Sort of piggybacking onto that, I think that having like government interference, I guess, will help hold individuals more accountable, because individuals may not feel like, if if I choose not to buy from fast fashion, how is that really impacting things? But if very few people are even given the option to buy clothes in that way, or maybe the government starts regulating the production of these factories and things like that, people just simply won't have the option. So that's a way that, like I said, it's hard when you're maybe don't have the financial capabilities to be making like sustainable choices and things like that. So simply like everyone mobilizing to change their practices would aid people in making better choices.
I completely agree, but I also think, looking at it like practically, a lot of places where we get fast fashion from normally aren't from like the same country. They're like, clothing and things come from like all over the world. Materials come from different places. And I think that it's important, but it could also be really difficult to hold each and every country to the same standards and to the same level of ethicalness or sustainability, because we're so globalized.
Something that I think is really important to remember is that I think even if everyone were to stop buying fast fashion, for example, it's just simply not enough, because this is a state of crisis. And if we, like, small changes won't help us to the extent that we need help. And the point of legislative action and laws is that it can bring everything forward systemically. So like the whole country can move forward, and we can all cut down our emissions per capita instead of small individual actions such as recycling. And also, one of the biggest problems is energy. And that's really hard. If we all just cut down our energy, of course it will help. But to get to that point is really hard, and it's like it won't come quickly. Like, of course, a lot of people are using green energy, etc. But it isn't enough for us to, I mean, we're still polluting like crazy. But with legislative action and the whole system moving to more green energy or a more sustainable way of living, we can like make changes that will actually keep us below the 1.5 or 2 degrees.
Very interesting. Yeah, Eva, go ahead, please.
I also wanted to add to that, like, I feel like even if we take it to bigger scales, than like if we all agreed to never go on planes again, like planes only count for like 2.53% of the global like CO2 emissions. So even if we all do that, we're still not cutting down enough. And like Linnea was saying, like, we're in a state of crisis. And although, yes, we can all try and do our bit and try and reduce our individual emissions, that I'd agree and say we need the governments and we need legislative action and laws to be put in place so that it's like much harder for even fast fashion to run, or for energy that's not like green to like stop running and things like that. So I feel like, yeah, We need like mass, like legislative change. And although individual change might help a bit, it still wouldn't make the cut for the state we're in right now.
And even if you'd want people to make individual change, you have to teach them what to do, because like I said, the best thing you could do is go vegan, but most people think the best thing you could do is, for example, recycle, which at the end of the day doesn't help that much. And like we're point of we need education to teach these people what to do. So then again, like it should be a change in every school to yeah.
I would agree with that too. Like with the government being a force that can enable people to make more change than like just one individual can make. But I'd also say that it is still also a bit of both, because if an individual can show that they want change, that can prompt the government to put more resources to enable that individual to create change, whether that's more laws regulating fast fashion or laws regulating the amount of gas you can buy. So I think that if individuals can show that this is something that they care about and that's important to them, the government can more enable them to take action against climate change or pollution or whatever issue it may be.
It's going to require a concerted effort for sure on the part of governments, and perhaps also on the part of individuals, insofar as many of those governments are democratic, and therefore for them to take the tough decisions that are needed, they need the support of the voters, and the voters, if they're not convinced that they need to take individual steps, then the government won't be convinced either. So perhaps it's a concerted effort on everyone's part. I'm aware of the time here, and we haven't given a chance to Tavisha or Varun to speak, and they will shortly. There is one question from the floor which relates to just what we've been discussing, actually, so I will interject it here. Do you think countries should be allowed to exceed their emissions targets by paying other countries to cut their emissions by more than their emissions targets? A kind of carbon tax proposal, if you will. So do you think some countries should be able to exceed their targets if they pay other countries which would cut more? What do you guys think about that?
I recently read about Bhutan, which is a country that's completely carbon negative. So they actually do more for the environment than they do emit carbon emissions. But personally, I don't think countries should be able to do that. I think if we're holding countries to reduce their emissions, then everyone should be held accountable and should reduce emissions and should meet their targets.
Any others have views on this? Varun?
Well, I think it's like a viable option, but like I'm trying to think that if I was a citizen in a country and I realized that one of my own countries was paying another country to not, so it wouldn't have to lower its own pollution levels, and like it would result in a more unhealthy environment for me. I don't know how exactly, like, I wouldn't be very happy about that, and I wouldn't like want that to be an option for my country. But then there's also the argument that these countries need these sources of energy to sustain their growing populations. So I think there's a very fine line between it, but I think in some instances it would be appropriate. But I cannot say for sure.
There is a question of equity, insofar as some countries might the impact on one country of cutting 11% in terms of the standard of living of its people might be radically different from the impact on another country. So I suppose, but that is being taken into account in the Paris Accord, but it was taken into account in the Paris Accord. We're running. No, we're not running out of time, but I want to leave time for Tavisha and Varun. So Tavisha, over to you for your presentation.
So my presentation is extremely relevant to what we've just been talking about. It's about like the small steps. Can you see my screen?
Not yet. Now we can. Yeah, now you're, yep, there you go.
So basically like the ease of leading a sustainable lifestyle and its impact on the world around us. So throughout this entire webinar, there's been a lot of conversation about the importance of climate education, climate miseducation. But once we do have that climate education, once we are aware of the impact of climate change. What small steps can we take on an individual level? And while I agree with all the discussion about holding the government accountable and making sure that is legislation and law in place for us to be more environmentally friendly, what can we do on an individual level right now when there's still a lack of legislation and laws in place? So what exactly is a sustainable lifestyle? So the word sustainable gets thrown around a lot. And what does it really mean on an individual level or in this specific context? So living in a way that attempts to reduce an individual's use of the Earth's natural resources. It's basically like a balancing act between the people and the planet. So how are you ensuring that you're giving back as much as you're taking so that we make a good use of our natural resources? And so there's no doubt that we've been on a ridiculous, unsustainable trajectory as a culture and society, and society's consumeristic mindset has normalized unsustainability. And this entire ethos is just not compassionate towards the planet and, in fact, like all forms of life. And so I think we have a moral obligation to be more sustainable for the future of the planet, keeping climate stable and conserving biodiversity, to name a few. So I think Laura talked a little bit about this, but what can we do as individuals? So cutting out meat. So if 1 pound of meat takes 1,500 to 200 gallons of water to make, which has a detrimental impact on the environment. And later Varun will talk more about water and water scarcity, and like reusable water bottles, cutlery, coffee cups, like these types of things end up in landfills for no reason, despite there being alternatives. And we shouldn't try to jeopardize the environment and 50 to 200 years of these things being in landfills for something that there's an easy alternative for. And if it's styrofoam, for example, coffee cups, it never decomposes. And so why are these things still available? If we continue to consume them, big corporations will continue to supply them. But if we as individuals start to move away from things like this, they'll in turn, for example, like plastic bags. As a result of people going out and not using plastic bags, there's a plastic bag ban in a lot of countries. Environmentally friendly cleaning products. I don't think this is something that's talked about enough, but a lot of cleaning products that we have today have toxins that can affect wildlife and plants. Saving water. So there's the whole thing about water scarcity, which Varun will talk about later. And then like bringing in your own grocery bags or produce bags is similar to the whole like single-use plastic. For light bulbs, moving from incandescent to fluorescent light bulbs. If every American household replaced only just one of these incandescent light bulbs with fluorescent light bulbs, the reduction in pollution would be equivalent from removing 1 million cars from the road. Sustainable clothing, like even buying fast fashion and making sure that these companies practice fair trade or organic or execute environmentally friendly practices can have a huge impact, because even clothing fibers have microplastics that affect the ocean. And so or trying to relocate water from water hungry plants like grass. Like in San Diego, we're a drought prone area, and having grass takes up a lot of water, which could be used for a lot of other resources like food. And so what's the real impact of making small changes? So it's a fair assumption that making these changes is not really going to make an impact in the long run, but things add up. Using a disposable plastic bottle every day, that's 365 plastic bottles that could have been avoided with a reusable water bottle. Plastic bottles take a long time to biodegrade, and they turn into microplastics, which often end up back into our ecosystem, specifically if you choose to eat fish. And microplastics is an issue that spans just beyond these disposable, like plastic fibers from cheap clothing and microbeads from personal hygiene products, which all contribute to this problem. And so these small changes, if everyone does them, makes a much bigger impact. And yeah, so I guess it's time to start thinking what your small steps are in being more environmentally friendly.
Great, thank you. Questions of Tavisha? or comments?
Do you believe that if everyone who's interested in a sustainable lifestyle would follow those steps, it would have a large impact on reducing emissions?
I think like obviously it would have an impact, but it wouldn't have as much of an impact to reach that 11% that you were talking about, because that includes like a lot more stuff needs to be done in order to do that. But I also think that as individuals, if we have the option to, I think we should, and we shouldn't just say like, oh, because it's the government's responsibility or because it's like larger corporations' responsibility, I'm going to continue to live this unsustainable consumeristic lifestyle. And so I think that we still have an obligation, even though other corporations and big governments also need to be held accountable.
So with like taking small steps, that's like a form of behavioral change. And obviously that's a big part of changing the behavior of individuals. But do you think different policies could be put into place to incite people to take steps for them to like ration out the amount of water they use, or just create a more like frugal understanding of water usage in San Diego, for example, where it's not really the most abundant resource?
Absolutely. I think that there needs to be, I think regulation would be very helpful in doing these types of things. Like in general, in for example, one example that really shocked me was like in San Diego or even in California, when you drive your car, if you leave your car on, you can leave it on for as long as you want. You can idle for as long as you want. There's no laws that's restricting you from keeping your car on for 2 hours in the parking lot. And so I think that that's something that's incredibly insane. Like that's a lot of emissions. That's a lot of carbon dioxide that could just be reduced with a simple rule that don't keep your car on for more than 5 minutes if you're not in it. So, yeah.
Other comments or questions on this? Very important, by the way.
Do you think that too many people kind of use the excuse like, oh, there's no ethical consumption anyway, like under capitalism or things like that, to just go crazy and buy whatever they want for example, side machine or non-ethical?
I think there's one part of that where there's like a lack of information as to like people know that they're bad for the environment, but people don't know why they're bad for the environment or what impact it has. And I I don't know if I don't know how many people use that excuse because I don't really have information on it, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was people out there who thought that if everyone else is buying from an unethical site, then why does it matter if I do too? I'm just another single person. And so if everyone has that same mindset that, oh, it's just like everyone else is doing it, everyone else has this like clothes from this store, then why does it matter if I do? If everyone changes their mindset to, I shouldn't buy from this store because it's bad for the environment, then like there'd be fewer people that I think it's a change in mindset, which is obviously very difficult, but yeah.
What have students on the panel done themselves to reduce their own carbon footprint, yourselves or your families?
Something that I've definitely tried doing is like when I'm buying clothes, because I like to shop a lot. I like to try and like visit more thrift stores and find things that are secondhand or like being sold on secondhand websites. And also, I do sell some of my clothes on like secondhand websites to try and like encourage sustainability as well.
Other steps people are taking? Baron?
I guess like one of the things I try to do, it's really simple, but it's just kind of reuse everything you have, because a lot of like for one example, I have a reusable water bottle. Like I know a bunch of people have that, so I think that's a good thing to do. A lot of other times, like if you have a paper towel, like a tissue, like I just won't throw it away because I'll just keep it and just use it for something else, because a lot of times those can add up. A lot of times I won't use like plastic plates or plastic cups. So it's really small, but that's like one thing I've started to try and do to limit my footprint.
How about students in Brussels? Is there scope for individuals to take really small steps like that? Or is it more importantly a state responsibility?
Definitely take public transport because it's quite good in Brussels. So you've got buses, trams, metros, trains going almost everywhere. So like always try to use those. Also really try to cut out meat and dairy as much as I can. I'm not vegan, but I try my best to be and like eat fake meat and things like that. Yeah, yeah, just I mean the biggest thing I'd say that we've done in Belgium, like student wise, are the strikes. Cause in Belgium they were really huge. Like in Brussels once, I think there was one with 30,000 students. Like everyone was just there demanding stricter laws and regulations.
These are the
Um,
Friday strikes
so I
led by
think Brussels,
Greta?
yeah,
Yeah,
during school.
yeah, right.
Well, in Belgium, it's Anuna de Wever, but Greta's also been to one of the strikes. So yeah, I think Brussels is quite self-aware, and most people really try to, like Lucy said, shop on even like thrift store like apps. Depop, for example, I think that's also big in America. Also try and buy gifts from small businesses, so people who like spend their time making earrings or whatever. um, that's like the biggest.
How about students in at La Jolla? Have you guys gone on strike on Fridays?
I went to one strike last year, just like because of the area we're in, there's not a lot of like people to see us. And but there was a strike last year where a bunch of like I think a group of 30 students went.
Okay.
Mhm.
I'm aware of the time, and we have one last presenter. Varun, would you like to take the floor?
Sure, yeah. Let me just share my screen. Are you all able to see that, the presentation?
Yes.
Okay. So my topic is on water scarcity in various regions and its relevance to San Diego's
Except,
own water
there you go.
crisis.
Yeah, it was a little bit cut
Oh,
off.
is that better?
Yeah, that's better. There you go.
So in California, where me, Lucy, and Tavisha are from, 75% of the state's water originates in its northern third, while 80% of the state's water demand comes from cities located in the southern two-thirds of the state, like San Diego or Los Angeles. Furthermore, there have been studies on how San Diego's cheap water pricing structure doesn't encourage sustainable behavior. According to the UCSD Water Economics Department, the current structure of water pricing in San Diego is over 50 years old and does not accurately reflect the scarcity of water given current demand. The flat marginal cost provides no incentive for water conservation. However, a more updated and pricing structure would encourage San Diegans to adapt their habits to fit their strained water supply. This idea of promoting water sustainability through behavioral change, like Tavisha talked about, was seen in Cape Town, South Africa. Some of you may remember the 2017 to 2018 water crisis that Cape Town went through. Experts believed the city would inevitably reach a day zero where all municipal water supplies would be turned off to conserve all remaining water reserves. As citizens of Cape Town became more exposed to the realities of water insecurity, they began to understand just how much water their daily appliances used. As a result, they devised water-saving habits. Plastic cutlery replaced traditional forks and knives. Food was grilled instead of boiled, and water from washing the dishes was used for flushing the toilet. Such large-scale behavioral change was made possible in part by the implementation of smart water meters in Cape Town, such as Jolla, which is seen in the image to the left right here. These meters were placed in schools to educate students and headmasters of how much water they were using and to alert them of any leaks or excessive levels of consumption. If a leak was found, a dispatch team was sent to address the problem and limit the amount of water lost. Jolla worked because it exposed people to how much water went into their everyday actions and prompted them to find ways of cutting their own consumption. If San Diego can improve on implementing water meters similar to Jolla, it too could better incite its citizens to change their unsustainable habits and to live more within their means. Currently, the University of San Diego has almost 1,000 automated water meters across its campus that provide real-time data on water usage. By increasing their number, the university could further lessen the amount of water it wastes. Another city that is going through a heavily economic water crisis is Lima, Peru. Currently, 1.5 million Peruvians lack running water. And since the nature of the problem there is economical, the city's solutions need to be based around developing improved water infrastructure. This has resulted to Lima turning to a rather non-traditional source in refurbishing ancient Incan water replenishment systems known as mamateos. The mamateo system utilizes amunas, which are ancient stone channels found in watersheds above Lima in the Andes mountain range, where rain is a lot more prominent. And the process is outlined in this photo right here, where amunas can capture mountain rainfall where it would otherwise be lost. The captured rainfall is then diverted into an infiltration ditch, where it is brought to the water table underground. Months later, the water emerges in springs or man-made stone pools and can be reallocated to reservoirs for later use. If San Diego is able to invest into its own green infrastructures like Lima has with amunas, it can capitalize on rainfall that isn't traditionally utilized. Green infrastructures like rain gardens, parks, and green streaks can soak up falling water through the ground and direct it to underground aquifers for future use instead of diverting it to storm drains. By improving on the water sustainability methods of Cape Town, Lima, or other foreign nations, San Diego can more aptly confront the water scarcity issues that have defined its history. Yeah. And that is the presentation.
Thank you, Varun. What's the link between water scarcity in California and climate change or greenhouse emissions?
Well, with California, its population is growing and it already has a very arid Mediterranean climate. And as global warming increases through rising pollution or carbon emissions, the strain on water is only going to grow higher. And it's the amount of rain that California is receiving is already decreasing, and it recently just recovered from a drought. So by finding ways to capitalize water where it's coming now and to be more frugal with its water savings, California can better prepare for the future water scarcity that it's sure to face.
So water scarcity is at least in part a result of climate change, but the measures that you're talking about don't really address climate change, do they? They address water scarcity as a symptom of climate change, or as partly a symptom of climate change, but to guarantee larger supplies of water doesn't necessarily reduce greenhouse emissions, does it? Do you see my question?
Well, in a way it would, because by using green infrastructures that do allow for a greater allocation of water, parks, green streets can also lead to less carbon emissions by carbon sequestration through green street parks. So, and the problem is really intricately connected, because green infrastructures that can reduce carbon emissions also have the effect of increasing the amount of water people can use. And they're also a lot more taxing on the environment than traditional pipes or traditional desalination that usually requires a lot more energy to bring water that's imported. So in a way, they can still give you more water by capitalizing on water that usually would go to storm drains, but also limit the amount of carbon that goes into the air.
Got you.
I have
Yeah, Tavisha, go ahead, please.
Do you think that it's more important to address the issues using new types of infrastructure to address the issues of climate change? Or do you think it's more important to address the issues of water scarcity? So new types of infrastructures are encouraging people to be more how to distribute the water? Or do you think it's more important to try to resolve the root issue, which is climate change that leads to water scarcity? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think for certain cities like San Diego, I think water scarcity, it is a issue that people can feel every day. So dealing with that, I guess in the short term, would not only lead to solutions that can help with climate change, but solve a problem right now that is only going to get worse for San Diego. But I also think in the long term, whether it's climate education, creating different government policies to limit climate change, would also benefit San Diego by making it a healthier place to live in and making it safer, but also ensuring that its water supply is more secure more has more security in the future through limiting the effects of climate change. If that answers your question, or okay.
That does. Thank you.
Questions from Brussels of Varun? No, I suppose with respect to water, like many other commodities, one answer is to tax it or make it raise the price either through taxes or other means to influence behavior, and in this case to alleviate scarcity. Right? I mean, many economists, that would be their solution, right? So you tax it, and of course, if you're low income, you might have a break on the tax, right? Some sort of might be taxed at a lower rate, so there are economic solutions to this, but of course, it requires government action. So we get back to the question, and by the way, we're pretty much run out of time. This has been a fascinating discussion. I really want to appreciate you guys for your back and forth. Tavisha, did you want to say something? You took your mic off.
I was just gonna say, is it really ethical to tax something so basic, like such a basic necessity like water? I don't know, just something to think about.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to deprive people of enough water to survive? Obviously not. But do you want to somehow discourage overuse or superfluous use? Perhaps. So there might be ways to actually structure the cost increase so that you're not punishing people for say consumption that's needed to survive. So I mean, there are various ways to try to implement it. I was just making the general point that when it comes to trying to control behavior, states can have a huge influence through influencing the price structure. But in any case, we've run out of time. I want to thank the panelists for their give and take, the attendees for the questions. I mean, these are huge questions. I really enjoyed the back and forth on small steps by individuals versus big steps by states. Are they mutually exclusive? Can they support one another? It's a really important debate, and it's existential. You know, we're speaking during a pandemic, which has made life for all of you extremely difficult. I'm almost apologetic about that, even though I don't consider myself responsible for the pandemic, but I feel very sorry for young people like yourselves. The reality is that the pandemic's going to end. There may be other ones coming in the future, fine, but this one will end. But the climate crisis will still be with us, and it is existential. So this discussion is exceedingly important. I appreciate the research that you've all done, the work you're doing to make this to overcome this problem. And we may not have come up with ready-made solutions today, but I think the discussion was terribly interesting and important. And I want to thank everyone, and I want to thank the attendees who participated as well. One last thing, I understand that in San Diego at school today at La Jolla, there's a school-wide event. I'm sorry you had to miss it. Hopefully you'll be able to get to it after this, and I would encourage you, we will make a recording of this and we'll make it available to your schools so that anyone who was not able to participate in the live session can see your wonderful work. So anyways, with that, we'll close off. Thank you very much, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.